I just want to speak the name of Jesus till every dark addiction starts to break, declaring there is hope and there is freedom. I speak Jesus. We sing, your name is power, your name is healing.
heard the words, "You've been faithful now, you'll be faithful then," I thought about both of our speakers, and I especially thought about the one that speaks next. And you'll get to hear her story. Amanda Billups is married to Matt. She's been married for 20 years, and she won't look like it, but she has 8 children. She's a homeschooler. She stood up when we recognized the homeschoolers. She says she likes to cook, write, and serve others with her family. In 21-22, Amanda faced the challenge of an extremely sick husband as Matt went through COVID with major health impacts. God answered every prayer and those of the church, and Matt continues the path of healing even today. Most recently, Amanda began her own battle with cancer. She will share her journey of how God has worked in her life and in her family, and how she chooses, how they all choose, to move forward in faith with the Lord as the author of her story. Welcome to the podium, Amanda Billups.
Good morning, ladies. You okay? So, this morning, I wanted to start out and ask you just to bear with me because I prepared some pictures because I would like to tell you a story today. And this story is basically the last 20 years of my life, my family's life. And we can tell a complete story of how God's just been there and how important it has been for me to know the Lord through this journey we've been on. So bear with me. There are lots of pictures, but I feel like these pictures are so powerful to show you where we have been and where God has brought us. And so I just wanted to first start out by saying I do have Matt's permission and my family's permission because these pictures are very raw and vulnerable. None of them are medically what I would consider gruesome or inappropriate. It's just I wanted to show you how our God moves. Many of you have been such an integral part of that, praying for us. And we would not be here without all of you and our prayer warriors. So in the interest of time, I'm going to get started and bear with me as I tell you this story. So we have a recent picture of us at Easter. And our theme, Back to Life, I thought was so appropriate for our family because in so many ways, the Lord has had to revive our whole family back to life. We have been through quite a bit condensed into the last 20 years. And then Matt and I were both doing well at Easter, so we were just so grateful to all be together with our 8 children and doing well. And then next you will notice a girl in the story, and we'll go way back. About 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. And that's me at my high school graduation. And I had to give a graduation speech to many more people than what are in this room. But I remember being terrified and thinking, oh my word, I left the podium and I had 2 perfect sweat prints in my hands. And I thought the next person who comes up here, probably my aunt who's with me this morning, because she was my principal at the time. So I was on extra good behavior. And so I gave my speech, and I thought, well, no, it's me. The next person who comes to the podium is going to see my handprints. But I kept going and got my diploma. And I had planned to be a career woman. And I had gone to Marshall University and had a full ride because of some things I had earned for scholarships in a biotechnology program there that was new and exciting. And it involved not only the science that I was doing in school, but also some artistic abilities because I like to be really creative. My teachers noticed that. A lot of people invested in me. And this new program helped you to learn how to use DNA, to learn how to do forensics and profiles. And it was really interesting. And so I was working on that, had my mindset, and wasn't interested in dating. I thought, Lord, I'm just not ready for that right now. It seemed like everywhere I looked, the guys were not where I wanted to be. I knew the Lord since I was 8 years old, and He had been right there with me. And I knew enough of His voice to know that I needed to stay focused on him. But I had kind of given up and thought, let's just focus on my school right now. And so not long after I gave up that to the Lord, maybe a week or two later, my roommate said, hey, she was dating my husband's best friend. And she said, I really think I should set you up on a double date. And I thought, this friend, I trust her, but I don't know about that. I said, I really don't want to. She said, no, you know him. And I said, are you sure? Who? And she told me. And I said, oh my goodness, I've known him since I was 5 years old. There's quite an age difference between us. So he went off to college, and I was still finishing junior high and high school. And so I talked to my parents about it, and I found out later that graduation speech was really important because he was there to hear his first cousin, who was my best friend growing up. And she also gave a speech that day, but he remembered that I talked about the Lord. And that was one of the reasons he said yes to that first date. So I guess graduation speech was more important than I thought it was going to be. So the sweatprints were worth it. But so we went on our first date, and the rest is history. And it kind of went pretty quick because we already knew each other. He grew up with my older cousins, and I grew up with his younger cousin. And she and I were very close. And he trusted her word about my character. And so we started dating every weekend, and he was traveling. And as things got more serious, I soon started realizing that the Lord was telling me the biotechnology program, as wonderful as it was not where God wanted me. And I wanted to be so careful to not be excited about some relationship and let that pull me. But I knew God's voice. It wasn't that. God was asking me to step out in faith. But this step in faith meant, and we prayed a lot, and we discussed a lot about long-distance relationships or changing the plan that was before me. And so, as hard as it was for me to tell everyone that I was getting married, and that's a joyous thing, we were moving to Virginia for Matt's training for work in Roanoke, and I would lose all of my scholarships for going out of state, for getting married. I only had a few other financial aids that transferred. And at the same time, the Lord had really revealed to me that my heart was with children, and I wanted to be a teacher. So I had already started pursuing teaching. So the picture that you will see next is when we were engaged, and it was within a year we were engaged and planning our marriage. And I just, felt like the Lord had directly told me, even though I felt like I had let so many people down in changing what they had invested in me, I knew that God was telling me, and I was going to be sensitive to that voice, even if I was the only one who understood it. And I didn't know what God was doing, but I just went in faith. And I moved to the Roanoke Valley with Matt, and we were every weekend looking for a church in Roanoke, and nothing really felt like home. And then you will notice that the next picture shows us when we were newlyweds and starting to, I'm sorry, let me go back to the picture there. I want to tell you one other detail, I'm sorry. When we got married, we had a very short period of time there. It was so chaotic. God has condensed so much into the last 20 years. So he graduated on a Friday from medical school. We got married the following Friday. We went on a quick honeymoon and came directly back. He was studying our whole honeymoon. And so to add a little comic note, every little part of my story has a lot of funny things, if you can call it that. Now it's funny. It might have not been then. But on our honeymoon, first day on the beach, Matt had a little incident and stepped on a horseshoe crab. And the barb on the tail of the horseshoe crab went really far into his foot. So we ended up in the ER and on crutches, and lots of medical stores finding the right crutches for him because he's tall, and couldn't get his foot wet for the rest of the trip. And so that was pretty interesting, especially when the air conditioning broke and we couldn't go get the pool or the ocean or anything. And it was like the Lord was saying to us, now listen, you two, I put you together. But don't get used to that little fairy tale idea, because it ain't gonna be that way. I'll be with you, but it's gonna be like this. I didn't realize what a roller coaster would be, but it's so true. And so we came back, and I just was wanting to be a good wife, focus on school, and I was going to Virginia Western and doing my internship as a teacher and pursuing my degree. And it came time to enroll again. And I want you to see the next picture of the tree that we had just seen on our honeymoon before we went back for him to do his residency in my school. That is the angel oak in South Carolina. It's near where we went on our honeymoon. And that tree is so special to us because one thing, it's so beautiful, but it just amazes me the size of that tree and what it must have weathered in the so many hundred years that they say that it is in age. And the reason that it's still standing through all the storms and things that it's faced is because it has such an elaborate, vast root system. And its branches even have places where they have supported it and leaned up to support the branches, so one branch won't fall and the tree won't be out of balance. And they've really paid attention to that. But all those years that nobody knew it was there, it was so grounded where it would thrive. And that's so important for us to realize that that tree has survived because it's so rooted. Keep that in mind. And then the next picture that I was talking a moment ago about is when we started attending Franklin Heights about this time. So some of you may remember us back when we were newlyweds and one of the young couples here. And I was enrolling for my classes for the teaching program, and I had this just overwhelmingly nauseating feeling. And it wasn't pregnancy yet. I know that feeling well. It was not that. I just felt the Spirit saying, this is not where you need to be. And I was like, Lord, I can't do that. I've already disappointed everybody in saying I'm losing my scholarships, and they thought I was crazy. And then here I'm going to tell them I'm not going to go back to school right now. I mean, that's like me just saying I failed. I'm not doing it. And it was probably one of the hardest decisions at that time for me to do, but God just kept saying, not now. I didn't know when. I thought I would go back soon, maybe just one semester out. But God kept telling me. And Matt and I prayed about it and agreed. And I got my money back, and I was like, okay, Lord, in this time I don't know what you're doing, but prepare me. And Matt had some very tough rotations after that decision. And he just needed me to know how to be his wife and his helper. And I'm so grateful for that time because it helped to shape me into being the wife and mom that I've tried to be through things that have come since then. And so the next picture shows when we first had our son. Not long after we had decided for me to be home, the Lord had not told me to go back to school yet, and our son Madison was born. And so we had just joined this church. Matt was starting a new practice. He, as soon as we joined the church, became a teacher of a large connect group. And there were just so many new things. He soon after became a deacon in the church and very involved. We always thought God was going to take us back to West Virginia. And he wanted to serve the people there medically and spiritually. He loved his church there. But God called us away to Callaway. I call it our little call away. And so we knew God had planted us mostly because of you all, because of this church. So we had our church family who meant so much to us and rallied around us as we had no family here and had our first child. And so we realized when Madison was about 6 months old that the Lord gave us a surprise, and I wasn't feeling well in this time. I knew that nauseating feeling for a different reason. And you'll notice a pattern about every 2 years, so pay attention to that. So the next picture shows when it was two of us, and our daughter Madeline came when Madison was only 16 months old. And when I was pregnant with her, I was so grateful, but I thought, Lord, I am not capable of keeping my little one safe, and you're giving me another, and I'm going to have two babies, and Lord, I'm just not ready. I'm not a good enough mama. I was so happy that she was coming. I just felt not capable. And the Lord reminded me that he would equip me. If he was blessing me with that baby, he was going to equip me. And I was so grateful that during that time the Lord got a hold of my heart and Matt's heart to say, listen, I want, just for your family in particular, for you to give me control of that and let me plan your family. As many children as I want to give you, as often as I'd like to give you. And I thought, really, Lord? Okay. And so that was a very scary thing, but I understood it clearly, and so did Matt. So even though people were like, you two are overwhelmed, what are you talking about? Again, we knew God's voice and what he was telling us to do. And I'm not saying that's everyone's calling, but it was the calling for our particular family. And so that picture is when Madeline was just over a year old and the holidays were coming. And again, I realized I wasn't feeling well. Number 3 was on the way. And I had all kinds of stress from asthma attacks and got shingles, and all this church body was just bringing us food and ministering to me and getting me back to health. And I was starting to do good at the holidays, and January came. And my husband was going to work, and one day they called me from work that he never made it to work. And I knew that would be something very bad for Matt to never show and to never contact. And can't go into all the details because of time, but his truck hit black ice, and when he hit the embankment and lost control of the truck began to flip side to side down a steep embankment. And he had his seatbelt on, but it had enough force to partially eject him out the driver's window. And when the truck finally stopped, it rested on top of his body, pinning him to the ground. And they had to remove the truck from his body. And we later found that actually saved his life, though, because he had a broken bone in his neck. And just a simple turn of the head could have severed his spinal cord. And so God was there in every single moment, every detail. But the people who found him and airlifted him to Roanoke Memorial said they didn't think he would make it. And they tried to keep me away from him because I was pregnant. They didn't want me to see him because he literally was not cleaned up yet. It took a long time before I was allowed to see him. So these are some of the very hard pictures to see. But this was after they cleaned him up. When they first brought him by me, I did not recognize him. I knew his toe had a certain mole. And when they wheeled him by and his toe was sticking out, I thought, there's Matt. And it was such a hard time. But I will tell you, ladies, when you go through things like this, the Holy Spirit gives you this peace. I feel it this morning. The Lord is doing something special here today, and I just pray it's not about me, it's about him. I think he really wants to show us all how powerful he is. I just felt this sweeping over me. So many people were praying. By this time, we had just had Facebook, and we had missionary friends all over the world praying for us, and that was our lifeline, and all of you ministering to us. So they told me in the first 24 hours, he had 11 broken bones, head trauma. He started to improve. That was like 24 hours and 48 hours in the pictures you see. And he started looking like himself. And they had told me when they placed him on a ventilator in a coma that he may not make it, that it was just touch and go for that 24 hours. And so I was worried about being pregnant and being so stressed. And not long after that, he started answering commands and waking up, and the doctors were in shock. And the only words they could use was a miracle. And it was a shorter process with some of the things we've been through now. I thought it was long, but it happened the end of January, and by the time he went to progressive care, you will see the children were finally able in rehab to visit for the first time. And it was really traumatizing for them, because they hadn't been allowed, because of their age, to see their daddy. He looked very different. He was in a lot of pain, but God just miraculously started healing him. So many things that I could take all day to tell you about how God worked. But then He came home from rehab on our son's 3rd birthday, and we were just so grateful. He got back to work, and his grandmother thankfully got to see him get well, and then she passed away on my due date with Marabella. And so I didn't get to go to the funeral, and we were just so overjoyed that Matt was doing well, but so saddened by our loss of Grandma. And Marabella was born and healthy, and we just tried to hold on to that God had in the midst of all that given us this new baby. And so you'll see in the next picture that we were a family of 3, and when Marabella was about a year old, another little boy came along. And we were a family of 4. So that was the pattern. About every 2 years, I had another one. And so we knew God may give us more. We didn't have a certain number in mind. But during this time with 4 children, I really focused on some things that I had never been able to do before. We were a family of 6, and grandparents could help with the 4 more easily than it is to do now. And so you'll see that I was able to go on my first mission trip to Papua New Guinea. And then the following year, Matt and I were able to go on our dream trip to Israel. Very special. And it was really the first time that I had left the children for more than a day or 2. So that was hard for me to leave, but I'm so grateful I had that opportunity. And I was having all kinds of issues with my legs, from varicose veins, and talking about surgery, which I ultimately had to have a few years later. But the doctors had recommended that I try some things like learning to do some running and things, see if that would help. It did temporarily. And I found it a miracle, if you'll see in the next picture, that we involved the kids. I would do it as a family. We would do some 5Ks. And I had never, even as a child, been able to run on the playground because of asthma. And as an adult, I did better. And I just really thought, this is a miracle. I can run. I don't care if I'm the last one to finish. I can run a 5K. And my children enjoyed it. And so we were getting ready for this superhero family 5K involving Matt and all of us. And we said, it doesn't matter what time we finish, we're just going to be together. And I had an appointment in the evening before the run. And Matt was babysitting the children at home, but he had gone to my in-laws' part-time home just down the street from our house on a private drive. They watched movies for the evening, and I still wasn't home. And God was getting ready to show us again just how precious life is and how He's always in control. And I didn't know anything was wrong while I was gone. But Matt was taking the children to the truck, and they were buckling the little guy in because it's a private drive. He didn't have to buckle everybody up. Our oldest was going to get in front of the truck on his bicycle so his daddy could shine lights for him. And then our next child was in the bed of the truck because she often did that, and the dogs would run beside the truck. And it was only 1/10 of a mile on a gravel road where you go 5 miles an hour. And so the youngest girl, Marabella, was getting in the front of the truck to sit with her daddy, and she would help him steer. And the key was in Matt's pocket. The truck was not running. So technically, a vehicle should be fine, right? Well, the truck malfunctioned. And we later found out there was a recalled part. We didn't know. And so when she climbed in and touched that, it knocked the truck in neutral. And the truck was parked, and you can see where I'm standing in the picture that there's a very steep hill, and beyond those trees it gets even more steep to a ravine. In the dark, Matt was buckling Mason in because he was so little, and he wanted to help Marabella steer. The truck, suddenly he saw it jerk and knew what had happened, but there wasn't power brakes to stop it even though he tried. And so he had to throw our little toddler over to the side just to try to keep him safe. And he fell down, but got out of the way of the tires. And the truck went down the hill with a daughter in the bed and a daughter with the door open in the floorboard of the truck. And it went down the hill, and you can kind of make out some tire tracks there where it went down in the dark. And as it went down, the door shut at some point, and it went completely black, and all he heard was their screams. Our son, thankfully, had not gotten in front of the truck yet and went to get his little brother and to go help his daddy. They've been through a lot and had to take a lot of responsibility in some hard situations, our older ones especially, pretty traumatizing. And Madeline was trying to get to her sister, but there were fallen trees at the bottom of the property when it was cleared, and the truck rolled over that and went airborne. And when it came back down on the ground, it was enough of a stop to keep the momentum down, and a little small tree was standing, holding that truck back. Beyond there is where the ravine gets really steep. And when he got to our children and they just had a few bumps and bruises and everybody was okay, he just was so thankful, and it just showed us how precious life is. And I came home to that realization. I knew nothing was wrong. And the look on their faces and Matt's face, that I had almost lost my husband and all my children, and nobody was on the way yet. I wasn't pregnant. And I just thought, Lord, I could have lost everybody. What are you doing? But I just think God just continued to remind us, the Israelites, they went through so much in the wilderness. What did they do? They set up memorials as God provided for them to remind them of what he had done. They didn't wander there and stay and remember and stay in that problem and gripe and complain about it. But they looked back long enough to say, look what God did. So I'm going to get through this next one. They didn't stay there. And I think that's really important that we remember that. It's okay to look back and see where God has brought you. But don't dwell there. Stay there from what he's delivered you from. And so I'm going to try to keep moving on. I want you ladies just to see how powerful this is. And so you see those views of the truck. And then about a year later, I told you the pattern continued. So many months after, we were expecting our next child, Maya. And she was born such a bubbly little girl and a joy to the family. And it's just coincidence that I have the same dress on, but that's several months apart. And this was a time when you all were really lifting us up again in prayer, because Matt had been struggling with vertigo and migraines very badly for years. And it was even before we were dating that it was really bad. And we had been from doctor to doctor, treatment to treatment, and nothing was really ever taking care of it. So the accident did not cause it, but made it worse. Having a head trauma will really exacerbate all that. And so we had been told for work that he had to renew his license, and we were going to have to fly wherever they tell us the conference is and when they say. And he was having really bad episodes, and we had to fly to the West Coast for him to take this very hard exam to be allowed to work, and then fly back and take the other part in Roanoke. And he had to pass, and he had to feel good, and you all were praying for us, and we made it there. He passed with flying colors, and his migraines were still there, but God held us together. And so we were so thankful for God's provision once again. And then just after that trip, it was a few months later, we were, so glad he was working, and everything was pretty calm. And I started having that feeling again, but not so nauseated, just really tired. And we found out that I was expecting another child. And it was after his headaches. The next slide shows when I was pregnant and we went to a prayer retreat. And I was actually not very nauseated, so I just thought, maybe the Lord's blessing me with a really good pregnancy, that I finally have one, I'm not so sick. But we really think it was just maybe things weren't really kicking in with the hormones quite like they should, because around Thanksgiving, I was doing okay, and then I started having all this pain and not feeling well, and went to the doctor, and there was no heartbeat any longer for the baby. And I was only about 14 weeks along, but it didn't matter what point. It was just such a loss and a brokenness I had never experienced before. And the Lord really drew me close to him during that time, because I didn't know that I could be broken any further to experience this kind of loss. And so many women in this church that I didn't know had experienced a loss like this reached out to me privately and said, I've been there. I'm praying for you. This is something that was helpful for me. Can I help you? And it's given me a heart for women in a different way now that I've experienced that. And I know that some like to talk about it and some don't. But I just really see how God was preparing me for so many things and drawing me to where all I had was Him. There were times other family members couldn't talk about it like I could, and thankfully my children are very open about it and often still say, Mama, you don't have 8 babies, you have 9, because they know that our main one's in heaven. And so we were processing all this, and surprise, I didn't think after a loss that I would be able to get pregnant. And we soon after got pregnant with our little spunky Meredith, our little rainbow baby after a loss. And I was very pregnant in that picture at my sister's wedding as her matron of honor. And everybody was doing well. And I had Meredith, and she was a good baby. And when she was about a month old, it seems like every time a baby came, watch out, something else is going to come along with it, a challenge. That isn't enough of an adjustment. And the homeschool schedule changing every time a baby comes, and the nursing and all that. But she was about a month old, and I would often nap in our guest room so Matt could get the rest he needed for work. And I had our toddler Maya and the baby with me, and we were trying to go to sleep. And we often have horrible, horrible wind in our house on a ridge. And I'm used to hearing that sound, but that night it was really frightening, and I was praying, Lord, just let us get some rest. I'm just praying for your safety. And we were starting to doze off, and all of a sudden I heard this loud boom and felt the house shake. And a large tree was hit just the right way to uproot it, and it hit our house at the room where I was sleeping with the 2 girls. And it shook our house enough that a rock inside fell. Our little guys holding it there. It fell on our homeschool desks. And I was so grateful that nobody was there that time of night. But thankfully, structurally, we didn't have much done to the house. It was just some repairs to make it waterproof again. But it was just so visible to me how God is always... We must have His angels working overtime because they probably think, oh, there's the Billups family again. But the tree hit, and we had talked, we were outgrowing our home, but we weren't ready to build on yet, and so we were just trying to be patient, and it was a huge interruption because it was the fall, and they couldn't get it all done. They had to work with the weather, and we learned a lot about our schedule being all messed up again. And we got through it, and they repaired everything. And then, right after they were done with the repairs, I was expecting again. And so this time, we had planned financially that we were going to, by the time the baby was born, soon after start working on an addition for our home. And so, thankfully, the tree falling had really only been an inconvenience, and everybody was okay. But you'll see that we were able to go on a baby moon when we were pregnant with this child, with McKenna, and we went back to the Angel Oak. And boy, that tree meant a whole lot more to us after what we had been through. We'd just sit there and look at that tree, have a picnic for hours. And I thought, I'll add a little funny note. Matt found a dead horseshoe crab on the same beach, and he said, I'm not going to let it get me this time. But, I just thought, it was almost like it may sound silly, but a symbolic thing that I was like, Satan, you've tried so many things against us, but you're not going to prevail. And our God is so much more powerful. And so we were on this baby moon knowing that we were going to have the baby, and then we were going to, and she was only like a month old, start construction at the house. And so McKenna was born. And our family felt really complete. I thought, if God doesn't give me any more, I'm content. How could I complain? But God had never given us a number. And I always knew His possibility. So you'll see on the next slide, She's a sweet little thing. We had met the family for lunch, and our house was starting to get all torn upside down as they started to come in and add to our house. And we had met my family for lunch, and Matt and I were talking, that we may have more babies, but we had a plan at our house, even with the arrangements of building on, that if God gave us more, we always knew how to figure it out. You work around those things. They're little things. And so construction began. We were able to build. And you'll see where they were starting the process of building onto our house, the lower section. And after they got up to the upper part, we had another miracle happen at our house because one of our builders was working one day and fell from a very high level onto our concrete patio. And he was injured badly enough that they had to airlift him just in Callaway out to the hospital. And thankfully, he just had temporary injuries similar to what Matt went through, but it quickly healed and he is fine today. Just another miracle, because I thought every time I look out my doors at that patio, what that would be like if I knew one of our workers had died there. Just so thankful that he was okay. He had a young family. And so right when they were moving their tools out, and COVID had just begun in the middle of our building on. We started in 2019 and COVID began. And timing changed, costs changed, everything was upside down. We were doing everything on our own to move around because of social distancing. And we thought, we were working extra hard. And I started feeling that feeling. And I thought, I'm just exhausted. That's what it is. But it turns out I was expecting. And our builder said once we had an addition, we were adding another 2-foot addition to our house. And so the baby was doing well, but it was a very different pregnancy to go through COVID and wear masks and all that while you're trying to breathe and you're pregnant. But Martin was born. I was pregnant with my sister again, even though she's much younger than me. We got to be pregnant for 2 of our pregnancies together. And he was just the little sweet joy that we didn't know we needed. And this baby was such a blessing. All of you are kids, for the ones that are here today. But Martin when he was only like a week and a half old, it was my easiest delivery. I thought, Lord, if you give me 1 or 2 more, it'd be nice to have a couple of deliveries like that again. I don't have to go through that many to get to an easy one. But anyway, he was sleeping well and giving me rest, and I was not stressed. I was so surprised. And once again, after a baby's born, it seems like something would happen to try to steal that joy away, and we have to constantly keep our focus on the Lord. But when Martin was only 10 days old, I was cuddling on the couch with him and one of the toddlers, and my heart started racing. And I thought, I've never felt that before. So I tried just to resituate, and nothing was working. And then it felt like my heart was going to pound out of my chest. And so I thought, Lord, I don't know what's going on. Matt was already in bed, but I went to get him, and I said, something's going on. Tell me what's happening. And my heart was, sure enough, in AFib with a very high heart rate. Didn't have any reason why. He tried some maneuvers, nothing worked, so we had to go to the hospital. And during this time, it was COVID still, and they were code red. So they had told us, when you come in, even though your baby's only 10 days old, you cannot have him with you. So I was heartbroken and scared. I had never had anything like this happen to me. And so I went to the hospital. Matt, I wanted him to be there to tell me, in his words, he understood all the terminology, what's happening to me. And they told me all these scary things. We're going to give you a medicine and you might feel like your heart is stopping. And, just telling me all these things. And I just tried to pray and say, God, I can't be with my baby. I can't be with my husband. Just help me. And God showed me how he, again, just carried me through such a scary situation. They tried every medicine. They ran every test on me. I had a CT scan that checked all my organs. Nothing was there. And this was just in 2021. And so after so many hours it didn't work, they said, we're going to have to transfer you. And it was a miracle that I got a bed and got moved to Roanoke Memorial. And they had planned to do cardioversion to shock my heart back into rhythm. And they were timing, with the pharmacist's help, when my milk was safe and no medicines were in it to hurt the baby. And we would send it to the car by a nurse after I would pump, and they said it was safe. And then Matt had to keep it, it snowed, and he would give the baby some and put it in a cooler in the snow on top of the car. And then when he needed to heat it, he'd heat it with the vent and keep the little guy from crying all night. And when they realized that that's the only option we had, everybody here was praying. Right now, we're getting ready to go down for cardioversion. It means I'm going to be placed on Coumadin and going to the clinic nearly every day because that was the safest for the baby at the time with nursing. And I really didn't want to stop nursing. And so I had just accepted, okay, God, this is my new journey. And so they were unhooking my monitors to take me down. And I don't know how many of you were praying, but all of a sudden the doctors looked at each other and they said, what'd you do? I said, I did nothing. We're going downstairs. And they said, what did you do? And I said, nothing. And all of a sudden my heart went back into rhythm. It was normal. It was slow. There was a calmness over me. And the doctor said, I don't understand. And I said, I do. I said, so many people are praying for me right now. I said, that's what did it. I've been on the same medicine all night and all day. But because they had me on this medicine, they kept me on it because that was protocol. So that affected how we planned our family from then on out. Because medicines they had to leave me on made it unsafe to have more children. But I see that God was preparing me for things that I couldn't imagine could be even harder than that. And so this picture shows when I was separated in that mask. If you'll go back for just a second. And then when I was first in tears, reunited in the car with my baby. And then I got to go home and see everyone. And Martin was just such a happy, sweet, flexible baby. He's had to go through so much since he's been born, literally from 10 days old. And so I was just so grateful. And God had shown how faithful he is again. And so if you will see on the next slide that Thanksgiving came and he was getting to the age that he got to enjoy all the yummy food. And I love to cook for my family, and we have all the extended family come for Thanksgiving. And we were eating dinner, and it was one of the best Thanksgivings we'd ever had. And that year, in 2021, the grandparents had decided they didn't want to do Christmas presents the same, and I was grateful for that. They wanted to spend quality time with the children. So they had planned a trip to Florida with the children after Thanksgiving because we homeschooled, that would work. And so the day after Thanksgiving, we went to Floyd to get our Christmas tree early, and it's like a bonus tree for the children to decorate. And then we decorated our living room with our big Christmas tree that we try to put up all the time, just to get in that mood before the children were leaving us. The older 5 were going to leave, and we had the younger 3 at home. And my in-laws started feeling a little bad, and I thought, well, my father-in-law usually gets sick every fall at Thanksgiving. And I thought it's probably just the leaves are falling, he's just feeling bad. And so we prepared, I met my parents, and got the children on their way. They didn't even make it to Florida before they started feeling bad. So back home, then I started feeling bad, and Matt started feeling bad, and the babies. So everyone started testing, and sure enough, we all tested positive for COVID-19. Like a total of almost 20 of us, all positive at the same time. Some in Florida, some in West Virginia, some at our house. And so Matt knew the protocol, and we were all just giving each other good care and taking care of each other. And we had 2 nebulizers. Both of us were doing the same exact thing. He was so worried about my asthma and that I would be the one, because he was really the healthiest if you think about it. And one day, he came to me and he said, I checked my oxygen and it will not stay up where it should be. I need you to call the ambulance. And I said, Matt, you know what that means? Like, I knew that he would not ask for that. You heard all the nightmare stories, people going on ventilators and not coming back off. And I knew he would not ask unless he needed to go. And so, reluctantly, I called. I knew I had to. I really thought that they were just going to be able to give him some oxygen, some medicines, and just help him. I thought that's got to be all they'll have to do because he's in good health. No really risks or anything. And so he was there in the hospital for about a week doing respiratory therapy, doing everything he could to try to get better, but nothing was working. And I noticed the text messages were not coming in. I wasn't allowed to see him, and they kept saying, well, according to his positive test, you can't see him until after the holidays. And I thought, after the holidays? Well, what's that matter? He's not going to be there that long. But I didn't know what was coming. And so a week into the process, I got a phone call, and they said, I'm sorry, but nothing is working. And by this time, he couldn't even have a conversation with me. He was just struggling to breathe. He couldn't even look at the FaceTime call. And they prepared to tell me that he had to go on the ventilator, and I needed to tell him goodbye if that was the last time I would speak to him. And I couldn't let the children be around. I didn't want to scare them. And I said, Matt, I love you, and I'm not going to stop praying for you. And I said, we're all going to be praying. You have a lot of people fighting for you in prayer. And I said, don't you stop fighting. I said, look where God's gotten us. And he had enough breath to say, I love you and I'm sorry. And I said, don't be sorry. I know you have to do this. And they hung up the phone and they sedated him and put him on the ventilator. And I was trying to process all this, and I just thought, Lord, let this be what would give him a chance to make it. I know what you've done before. Even though I was so unbelievably broken, I felt that presence of the Holy Spirit sweep over me. No words for it. And there's a lot of emotion that stirs up in the children, like the oldest two, remembering what happened when he wrecked. And so only 24 hours after being on the ventilator, they called me. And it was so hard to get information because sometimes a nurse had the time to tell me on the phone, and sometimes I would call and they would say, honey, nothing's changed. You need to prepare your children. He could go at any time. So you need to be talking to them about a funeral. You need to be talking to them about if Daddy does come home, he's going to look very different because he's going to be here for a long time. And he may never be the same. He may not be the same mentally. You just need to prepare them slowly. And I just thought, Lord, I don't understand. In our private prayer time alone and as a couple, the Lord had been showing us that he had something more for us. And we just thought, Lord, I'm not trying to complain, but we have a lot on our plate. What could you possibly have in store for us that could be more? What do you mean by more? But I kept clinging to that it wasn't about me, it wasn't about him, it was about us as a couple and as a family and as a church family, that he wasn't done with us yet. Not that there was anything about me or him that was worthy for God to keep us here longer, but that we were willing to say, okay, whatever this is that you have planned, we're going to say yes and do our best to give you the glory for it. And so I just kept clinging to that. I had dreams that I was at his funeral, and I would get to the front, and I would wake up every single time, and I never could see him there. And I just kept saying, Lord, you haven't shown me that that's what you're going to do, so until that moment, and if that's what it comes to, you will prepare me and equip me for that. But I'm not there yet, so I'm going to stay right here, firm, believing that you can heal him and you're going to. And I'm not going to stop believing until that last moment that you show me that it's time to let go. And so just 24 hours into this process, the ventilator was not doing anything. And they called me and they said, you're going to have to make some more hard decisions. And I thought, okay, And it still wasn't time I could visit yet. And they said, we need to use ECMO. And I said, what is ECMO? And ECMO is where they attempted to use, it's hard to see in the picture, but they had tubing that went directly through a cannula to his heart. And they pump all of your blood from your heart into a machine that oxygenates your blood for you. And then it pumps it back into your body. And this gives your lungs an attempt to try to heal and rest. But his lungs were so covered with COVID pneumonia, you couldn't see them in an x-ray. And it looked like he had no lungs. So even if they rested and healed, would they be able to move again? Would they be too stiff? There were so many what ifs and just living moment to moment. And I really used that time, though, to every little detail I could get. I tried to use that as my strategy. What can I tell you all to pray specifically about? That is so important. When even though you want to just shut down and not be watched, like you feel like you're under a microscope, and everyone is watching to see how you want to handle this and how you want to handle that. God gives you this supernatural strength if you let him, surrender to him, and keep your eyes focused on him. He will give you that provision to move forward. And it's just one day at a time, and knowing that he did it today, so he's going to do it tomorrow. And that's what I believe. And so day to day, finally they let me start FaceTiming. And I would read his favorite scriptures over him, even though he was completely sedated. And they say that hearing comes and goes when someone is sedated. And I thought, if he can hear me, I want him to hear God's word. There's power in that. I want him to hear me lifting him up. I want him to hear me telling him, everybody's okay, and we're hanging on here. You keep fighting. And I read Psalm 91, one of his favorites through COVID. And I just kept praying. And finally the time came that they were going to let me start visiting just after Christmas. And it was, at first when I started visiting, he was still sedated. And the thing about it was, they told me that when he would wake up, there was a perfect time frame to try to remove ECMO. If a person is on it too long, it can be very bad. If they're on it not enough time, then it can fail. And just the process of ECMO is a huge risk. We knew all this, but it was our only choice to try. And so they successfully removed it within that 6-week window. It had almost been 6 weeks. And he came out of that and slowly started waking up. But they told me a new variant of COVID was coming and that they were going to go code red again. And I would not be allowed to visit after only visiting for about a week. And I was so broken. I thought, how can you do that to me? And the children still couldn't visit. And through recommendations from his doctor that knew other survivors really needed a family member because of the confusion of trying to come out of this heavy sedation, that it was so important for their recovery, that I had to fight with a patient advocate, and I got 3 hours a day approved. And I could choose that 3 hours. And I would pick and choose when I knew that it was a good time for me that day, and I would pick and choose when certain nurses were working who were very positive and who would let me turn on Christian radio and who would sit there and pray with me when, everything was quiet. And God allowed me to see that even though I wanted to be there every moment, he was protecting me now, I see, because I didn't know that I needed rest and a monster was brewing inside of me. And God was keeping me to where I had to rest every day, and I had to go home, even when he was able to beg me, please don't leave me. That was the hardest thing to do, knowing that he, as a doctor, knew what all these things they're talking about me, and he couldn't talk, and he had a trach, and he couldn't use his hands. He had to learn to bear weight again. He had a trach when he woke up, and he had to process how long he had been asleep, what had happened to him. And he really thought, there's no way I'm coming out of this, because we had seen all that happen while he was asleep. And he just woke up to this horrible realization that he felt like he was already a dead man. And so we just went through this long process of getting him back to whatever normal would look like. And our son, Madison, was getting ready to have a birthday. And we had FaceTimed for our little guy Martin's first birthday. So that's how Matt got to see him for his first birthday. Because even though they gave me that exemption, it was one person per day per 24-hour period. So my in-laws still couldn't see him. Nobody except for clergy, some pastors to pray. And I was very thankful for that. And so a nurse that had been attending Franklin Heights before was his nurse on my son's birthday. And our son had been up praying, and he said, "Mama, I prayed that God would just let me see Daddy for a minute." And the nurse came to me and he said, "It's a pretty day." He called me actually, and he said, "We're allowed to take patients outside on a pretty day. Would you like to bring your family and meet him outside?" And I said, "Yes, we'll do anything. You tell us when to be there." And so we all gathered on a certain sidewalk, and we had to wear masks outside, and we were not allowed to touch him. His mama got to touch his foot, and he was still confused and trying to figure out that he was so relieved to see faces he knew. And it gave our son another hope. Even though he's watched so much God's done in our life, it gave him hope that God cared about those little things, even his birthday wish to see his daddy. And God carried us, and he was so faithful. And so after this experience, Matt kept doing really well, and they moved him to progressive care. And then he was preparing to go to rehab. And so I want you to see in the next slide how he started really looking like himself, and he had to learn to eat again and to talk again. And he had not been allowed to have anything to eat or drink for over 3 months. And there had been a tube feeding directly into his stomach, so he had to pass all these swallowing tests. And just the joy just to see him eat. I couldn't even stand to take a sip of water in front of him when I would visit him. I would go down the hall just to have a sip of water because I couldn't stand to do that in front of him. And he started miraculously coming back to Matt, and they just didn't know what to think. But one other thing I must point out is that when they were trying to save his lungs, another thing they do is they sacrifice your kidneys, and they use continuous dialysis to remove the fluid from your lungs. But you go into it knowing you're going to injure the kidneys, maybe for good, maybe temporarily. So the continuous dialysis saved his lungs, along with the ECMO. But then he was dealing with the reality of dialysis for we didn't know how long. And when he was in rehab, he dreaded dialysis day. It drained him. It made him feel worse. It was discouraging. And everybody was praying. We had accepted the fact that he was coming home, and we were going to be driving every other day to dialysis. But I didn't care. He was coming home. That was a little thing. And so he, one day, was getting wheeled, sort of like me going to cardioversion. He was getting ready to get put on the ambulance to go to another building where they did his dialysis. And a nurse came up and she said, "Well, Dr. Billups, it's your good day." He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I've got great news." She said, "Your labs this morning, the doctor said you don't need any more dialysis." And the nurses and everyone were just, praise the Lord, because they knew about our faith. And we had some from our church that were there, and they were just so grateful. And God just kept giving us little glimpses to hold on to. I'm here, just be patient. Just keep going. And so after we got that good news, they started telling me that I could bring in 2 children at a time of the older ones. And so the next slide is a very raw picture for me, because I wrote down when that was the moment he hugged one of our children for the first time. And it just so happens that Mason was the one with me that day. And just to see the embrace there, that they finally got to be with their daddy. And every day, I could only bring 2. And I brought them until it was time for him to come home soon after that. And he started looking like himself again. And he came home with outpatient therapy every day and people coming into our home. And we just kept working on getting Matt back to normal. And God answered that. He basically had gone from 0% lung function, and he was preparing to go back to work at about 45, and now he's up above 75, and we soon have some tests coming up to see where he's at. It's a continual healing for him, thankfully, and lots of prayers. We're still praying about his healing. And so you will see next that we came back to church, and Easter was our first Sunday back, and he still had to wear oxygen support, and we were coming every Sunday pretty much, and I was so grateful because in order to protect him, I had been away from you all and not coming in person because they wouldn't let me visit him if I came here. So I wanted to protect that. And even though I missed that fellowship, I knew that's what I had to do. And I'm so happy when I can be here in person with you because it's so different than just watching online. But then after we started coming back to church, Matt was going through the required things to get back to work. And you'll see a picture of my grandfather. And my grandfather had been diagnosed with esophageal cancer while Matt was in the hospital. And he had a really aggressive type. And he was getting ready to start some really hard treatments. And he was just worried about Matt getting back to work and being with me. He was worried. And I didn't get to spend a lot of time with Grandpa because of taking care of Matt. And I felt really bad about that. But he had the chance to meet all of my children. And Grandpa was my one. I had prayed my whole life for Grandpa to be saved. And I thought, Lord, is it ever going to happen? And when he was in his last week of life, he prayed with a family member and asked the Lord to be his Savior. And I was so overwhelmed with joy that even though it looked like Grandpa was going any day, that I will see him again. And so when Grandpa died, Matt was the closest thing he had to a pastor. Matt would witness to him with me faithfully. And the family said, Matt, how would you feel about, I know you're wearing oxygen, but how would you feel about leading the funeral, preaching Grandpa's funeral? And he said, I would be honored. And so Matt had the opportunity to do my grandpa's funeral, and it was just such a blessing to me for so many reasons. But then you see the picture there, Matt was going back to work, and I was trying to figure out, okay, what does school look like now? What is normal? Is there such a thing for us now? And so we were getting back to normal, and I had a friend take family pictures of us. And my dad had a health scare as well. You'll see a picture of my daddy in the hospital. We had taken pictures, and my daddy had this really freak incident that no health problems, and he had a bowel obstruction that put him in the hospital, and he almost became septic. And so they were very worried about my daddy not making it, but he got to the hospital in time, and he had some serious surgeries, but he was okay. And it was like, Lord, I don't understand. It's one thing after another. Like, what are you doing? But God showed me, listen, it's hard, but I'm here. I have not left you one time. He has never failed me. And I look back at his character and who he is, and that's what I cling to. Who is God? Who has he been to me? And so my daddy is now okay. And I was the one that started feeling really bad. And so a friend came and took pictures of us, and we were kind of updating everybody on how Matt was doing. And the leaves were starting to fall, and I just had all this trouble breathing. And I thought, well, I'm assuming it's asthma again. I just need to take care of myself. We had COVID a year ago, so it's just going to be different this time. And so we noticed that I wasn't getting better, and I was really struggling. And we were able to take the children on a trip for Christmas, and I was really struggling. We didn't know that I was a ticking time bomb. You know, I looked okay, but I did not feel well. And I was breathing many times worse than Matt was, and I thought, what is going on? And so we had gone through some other just little crazy things. Our son, Martin, was knocked down by a dog we adopted, and I had to go with him to the ER, and I was so sick and trying to be brave for him. And he just thankfully had some lacerations, and the dog wasn't trying to be aggressive, but the hound smelled something on him, was still a pup, and knocked him down, and we had to find the pup a good home, and it did. But it was so traumatizing for the kids and for our son and for me. And again, I was just like, Lord, I don't understand. I feel like I can't keep my head above water. It's just, I start to recover from one thing and I get knocked back down. And I had in the meantime, said, I am willing to go to a counselor. I know I've got some post-traumatic stress from all of this. How could you not? And so I just started trying to process all of this. And Martin was fine, thankfully, and he still loves our puppies, and he's not traumatized. He was young enough that he recovered, thankfully. But we kept going through tests and lab work for me, and something kept pointing to, even though I had been checked out so thoroughly, and even though the previous year, while Matt was in the hospital, I had gone to the doctor and my labs were fine, suddenly lab work was way off. And I went through test after test, and we really thought it was leaning towards something autoimmune, maybe cancerous, but I had no risk factors, the doctor said. I don't really think we're looking at cancer, but we're going to check everything out. After a CT scan was done, a thorough check, they called us, and I felt like a bomb had been dropped on me when they told me that I had stage 4 renal cancer that had metastasized to my lungs, and I had over 50 cancerous tumors on my lungs. Some were pretty good in size, and it was all from the renal cancer, a large blood clot on my kidney, and the tumor on my kidney was larger than an adult hand. And a person my age should not get this kind of cancer. The doctors were baffled. It didn't look good with the prognosis they had given me. But I kept, as much as I wanted to give up, I kept remembering where God had brought us. And I said, God, I don't understand. Are you done with me already? I thought you had plans, and I want to tell what you've done for Matt, what you've done for our family. I don't understand. And it took time, and it's still taking time. But God found me a wonderful doctor, and I'm so thankful for a doctor who knew some things we could do and is familiar locally. I only have to go to Salem. And I've been going through immunotherapy, which is much easier on me than chemo and radiation. And within the 4 first very strong doses of immunotherapy, we were able to start shrinking my cancer. And after those first 4 doses, I did start having some side effects that were not fun. Temporary Crohn's, that comes and goes, and then prednisone to try to treat that. But right now I'm having my little prednisone flush as I'm trying to talk to you. But that's okay, I'll take that. I can breathe right now. And if I wanted to, I could run or jump and I can breathe okay. But so now, recent scans have shown that all 50 places are gone. I have scars that show that they were there, but there's no active cancer on them, and the scars are not restrictive to my breathing. So it's like another memorial where God's brought me. It's proof that I had it, and it's not cancer any longer. And then on my kidney, the tumor is down to about 2 by 4 centimeters. And they think, because my immune system has been doing so well, that when I have scans next month, that I may not have any more treatment, and I may not even have to have any surgery. My kidney function has never wavered, even though I had this huge tumor growing on it. And I can't fathom the wonder and grace that God has given me another chance at life. And I don't know what it is that he has planned, but I want to be faithful to it. And it's him and his story. This story is all him. But I'm going to try to wrap it up, ladies. I know this is a long story, but a lot has happened happened this week. So bear with me. My emotions have been everywhere. The enemy did not want me to talk to you about all this because I believe there's power in it. And he's been trying all week in ways you wouldn't imagine. And I'll try to share just a little glimpse of that as I close. But I want you to see that we need a little funny note again. And so some good news. And so there was when my stomach problems started, the picture of me in the hat. And I was doing okay, but just glad that things were working. And then if you'll see on the next slide, while I was in the bed, I was able to see some of those promises that God has shown me that he had some things for me to do. I had been working on a book that I self-published about motherhood, and God put that on my heart before our COVID battle and my cancer. And I was able to get it published and on Amazon and have a book signing. And I was just so grateful that God was still able to say, hey, I'm still working. I'm not done with you yet. Just keep trusting me. And it was just such a joy to my heart to be able to do this. And so that happened, and then again, a friend was going to take pictures for us, and everything was getting back to normal. And I want you to see what it's like to really try to get, on the next slide, 10 people in a family picture. And then, after a lot of threatening, and you do this and you do that, get back up here, this is what you see on social media. After 20 shots or however many it takes. And so I thought that's really funny. I had to show you what it really looks like for most of the shots. I mean, how could I lie to you like that? And so we had all the pictures, and we're telling everybody that I'm doing well. And I'm just so grateful. But as I've been preparing to tell you all this story of mine, I asked the Lord, what scripture, Lord, would you have me to share? How can I set the mood for what they're going to hear today? Open their hearts, stir in them whatever you want to stir in them. And the Lord kept leading me to this plant analogy. We have this garden thing, spring thing for the weekend. This poor little snake plant in my house. I have a green thumb sometimes outside, but inside, not so much. You ladies need to help me. I know some of you are very good with that. But my children would sneak in my room and uproot this poor snake plant. I don't know how many times. And I would find it on the floor, and the dirt would be thrown in the floor. And I would find it in the bathtub, and I would find it. And I thought, well, there's no way this poor plant, I just need to throw it outside. And if it could grab a root outside, then okay, but I must well throw it out. And one day it was like God stopped me and said, no, wait a minute. There's still a really good root system on that plant when you find it on the floor. You know, don't give up on it yet. They had ripped the leaves, and it looked horrible. I was embarrassed that it was in my house. And so I thought, you know what? Okay, I'm going to try to nurture it. And I don't know how many times it was uprooted, but that little plant, it didn't die. And you see that picture, if you go back for just a second to the picture of me, the reason I put my picture there beside it is because in this battle, it's like from day to day, this up and down, that I'll have a great few days, and then Satan really, he can't have my health, so he tries to get me some other way. And I was just broken that day in tears, and family situations and relationships were just shaken. And I felt like that plant. I knew I had roots, but I just felt like everybody kept picking me up and throwing me, and I had nowhere to go. And I thought, you know, I gave this plant just enough dirt and repotted it with my mother-in-law's help, and I started giving it the right water and the right light, and just nurtured it and started telling the children, you're not going to touch this plant. And teaching the little toddlers, this is not how we care for these plants. Let's be kind to them, just like in the garden. And this plant started coming back to life. It's not the prettiest snake plant that I've ever seen, but it lived. And so this picture of me here is when I was at the doctor about a week ago, and he told me the news that I may not have any more treatment, and it was a really good day. And it's like I can have this invisible illness to my family, and they say, why are you not okay today? You were okay yesterday. And days that put me in the bed, even though my immune system is working, yay, it'll overreact, and I'll get stuck in the bed because my joints won't move. And then I have to take prednisone to be able to even get up out of bed. But when I'm in the bed, God reminds me, hey, this is just temporary. I'm going to be with you. And so I want for you to remember this. It's so important where that plant had enough to grab root and remember what it's supposed to do when it got put back where it needed to be to thrive. And so the scripture that kept coming to me, and you'll see it, I think, on the next slide, from Colossians 2, verses 6 through 7. I like this version. Therefore, as you have received Christ Jesus the Lord, walk in union with him, reflecting his character in the things you do and say, living lives that lead others away from sin, having been deeply rooted in him, and now being continually built up in him, and becoming increasingly more established in your faith, just as you were taught, and overflowing in it with gratitude. How fitting that in all that I've been through, all that we've been through, this is God's story, and we can see his hand in it every step of the way. And I plan to close there, and I know I've gone a long time, but I must tell you, because many of you heard a few things yesterday, and I just got to share this with you real quick as I close. Yesterday, my heart was ready to speak to you ladies. I had fought Satan all week, and we had a fun evening planned, and I was just going to relax for the evening. And Matt was coming home from work to join me, and he never got home. And that feeling, you can imagine what happens to me when I can't figure out where he is. It just sends me back to that day that I couldn't get him on the phone, and he was under a truck. And he finally had called me, but it was a number I didn't recognize. It actually said Richards. So I thought, hey, Sonia, are you trying to call me? But it was a phone that one of the pipeline workers had that would get a little bit of signal. And as he was coming over Bent Mountain to work Callaway, he was following, of all things, a street sweeper. And it was coming to push all the pipeline rocks back up off the road. Every evening it does that. And he comes that way every evening now. And I was able to, he called a couple times because it kept breaking up, and I realized it was Matt. And he said, I'm sorry, we have to cancel our evening together, but I'm okay, and I need you to know that. And I thought, when he said, I'm okay, and what happened? And he said, I was in a little wreck, and I'm okay. But even with him telling me that, I still have to see him. And I still have to know he's not hiding something from me, because he knows that I'm this close to a breakdown if he tells me what's really going on. And I said, Matt, I'm coming to you. And he told me exactly where he was. I know the road well. And I said, what happened? And all I got was I got hit by a truck, and my car is probably totaled. And then it started breaking up. And so this panic came over me, and I was like, I can't scare the children to death. And I was like, girls, I need you to come. And one of the little ones started screaming about that time because it was nap time for him. He missed nap. And I said, okay, God, where have you had me? What do we do? Okay, well, it's important. I need to get to Matt, make sure everybody's okay. And so I had them put the baby to bed. And then when the screaming stopped, I could hear myself think, and I started asking some people privately, let's pray. And so one of my sons went with me, Mason, and we got to Matt. And I saw that car, but I saw him standing there and walking around and talking. I was like, thank you, Lord, because the whole way there, yes, it's inconvenience that the car might be totaled. It's inconvenient that we got all this stuff next week to deal with, but he's okay. And what had happened was this lady, with really no fault of her own, she could not see him, and she was backing this street sweeper up, and the bumper on the street sweeper is higher than his car. So she could not see him, and he had stopped and given her room, but she threw it in reverse, and when she started backing, he tried to react and tighten up and put it in reverse, but he couldn't get back far enough, and she started backing over his car. And he said that he started thinking, it's going to crush me. how bad is this going to hurt, because it just kept coming. And thankfully, she felt the resistance after she got so far up on the hood, that because the car is so short, that she stopped. And it almost got to the windshield, but the hood just stopped right there. We don't know the damage because of what it did maybe to the engine. But Matt was in one piece. We were all okay. But you don't know how yesterday I was like, I'm calling Barbara, and I'm going to record this, and I'm going to say, here, you play it. Amanda's leaving town for the weekend. Because I was like, Lord, I can't do this. Like, it's been so much for so long. But people were praying. And when I got my focus and I started looking at Jesus again, it was like he said, I'm here again. Don't you forget that tomorrow. That I'm going to be right here showing you what to say. And this morning, ladies, there's been this peace over me. And I wanted to be faithful to be here to tell you. It's not me, it's him. So today, as you're in your sessions, I pray, do you need to nurture somebody else? Another plant? Is there somebody the Lord's put on your heart? They need a little help, they need a little water, and they don't have any. Is there somebody that you can't work on someone else until you work on yourself? What has God stirred in you? What is there something you can't surrender to him? Where do you need to grow? Maybe it's something you need to prune out. Maybe it's something that you just can't quite get the courage to give over to him. Listen, ladies, I'm dealing with cancer still. And I'm claiming victory over it. But there are other things that you may think are not as bad that have me squirming right now in my seat. That I don't like. Consequences and circumstances that I just can't wrap my mind around and figure out. But I have given them to the Lord in prayer. And I know no matter what I face, he's going to be right there carrying me from point A to point B. Sometimes it just doesn't look like we think it should, because it zigzags into this beautiful tapestry that he is weaving together for us. When you look at the back of a tapestry, it often looks like this big mess of threads and different colors, and you think, how could it ever be something beautiful? But God is weaving together this story of a beautiful picture. He's not done writing our story. So I want to personally this morning just ask you, listen, be sensitive to whatever the Lord says to you today. And I thank each one of you sincerely for the family you've been to us, for the prayers, the support, and praying for me as I speak today, because it was God giving me this story. So forgive me for the time I've taken, but I pray in some way that you were encouraged by what he had to say to you this morning. Thank you.
Ladies, did she do an awesome job? Yeah. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go on our breakout sessions. First, we're going to do that